Long ago, in a place where tall mountains touched the sky, there was a secret valley called Damsel. No one from the outside world knew about this valley. It was hidden by old magic that kept it safe for hundreds of years. The people of Damsel lived differently from the rest of the world. They didn't have phones or cars or computers. Instead, they had something special: magic crystals. These crystals grew in caves under the valley. They glowed with bright light and gave power to everything in Damsel. In the middle of the valley stood a tall, see-through tower made of crystal. People called it the Crystal Spire. It caught sunlight during the day and sent power to all the homes in the valley. Everyone in Damsel depended on this tower to live. Taking care of the Crystal Spire was a very important job. One woman was always chosen to be the keeper of the spire. This job was usually given to the oldest daughter of the last keeper. The keeper had to learn many secret ways to talk to the crystals and keep them happy. Elara Nightshade never thought she would become the keeper. She was only 20 years old and was the third daughter in her family. Her mother was the keeper before, and Elara had two older sisters who should have taken the job before her. Elara had trained to be a scout instead. Scouts watched the edges of the valley and made sure the magic that hid Damsel stayed strong. But then something terrible happened. A strange sickness came to the valley. It made Elara's mother and both her older sisters very sick. All three of them died within one season. This had never happened before. Now Elara had to become the new keeper, even though she wasn't ready. The day came for Elara to become the official keeper. All the people of Damsel gathered around the Crystal Spire to watch. The elders of the village wore their best clothes. They sang old songs that had been sung at these ceremonies for hundreds of years. Elara felt afraid. Her hands shook as she walked up the steps of the Crystal Spire. She was wearing the special white robe that all keepers wore. Around her neck hung a small crystal pendant that had belonged to her mother. "I am not ready for this," she thought. "I don't know enough about the crystals." The oldest elder, a woman named Syra who had white hair and kind eyes, smiled at Elara. "Trust the crystals," she whispered. "They will guide you." Elara took a deep breath and placed her hands on the Crystal Spire. This was the moment when the spire would accept her as the new keeper. Usually, the spire would glow with a soft blue-white light, showing that all was well. But something very different happened. As soon as Elara's hands touched the crystal, the whole spire flashed bright red, the color of blood and danger. The light was so bright that people covered their eyes. The ground under their feet began to shake. Some people fell down. Children cried out in fear. "What's happening?" someone shouted. Elara couldn't move her hands from the spire. It felt like they were stuck there. She could feel something flowing from the crystal into her body. Knowledge, power, but also great pain. The crystals were afraid of something. They were trying to tell her something important. At the edges of the valley, something even worse was happening. The magic that had hidden Damsel for centuries was failing. The invisible wall that kept outsiders from seeing the valley began to flicker like a candle about to go out. Far away, on the other side of the mountains, a man named Mason Reed was climbing a rocky path. He was a scientist who studied energy. For months, his machines had been picking up strange signals from these mountains. No one believed him when he said there was some unknown power source here. But today, his machine started beeping loudly. Something big was happening. As he looked up at what should have been just a wall of rock, he saw something impossible, a gap opening in the mountain, showing a green valley that no map had ever shown. Back at the Crystal Spire, Elara finally pulled her hands away. She was shaking and pale. The red light faded, but the damage was done. "The protection is breaking," she said in a weak voice. "Someone is coming. The outside world will find us now." The elders looked at each other with fear in their eyes. For hundreds of years, they had lived apart from the rest of the world. Now that was about to change forever. Elara looked at her hands. They seemed to glow slightly from within, like the crystals themselves. Whatever had happened during the ceremony had changed her. She didn't understand it yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Nothing in Damsel would ever be the same again. Mason Reed could not believe his eyes. 1 minute, he was looking at a solid rock wall. The next minute, a gap had opened, showing a green valley that should not be there. As a scientist, Mason knew that valleys don't just appear out of nowhere. But his eyes were not playing tricks on him. The valley was real. "This is amazing," he said to himself. He checked his energy detector again. The machine was beeping like crazy, showing that a huge amount of power was coming from inside the valley. This was what he had been looking for during the past 6 months. His friends at the university had laughed at him when he said there was a strange energy source in these mountains. "You're chasing fairy tales, Mason," they had told him. Now he would show them they were wrong. Without thinking twice, Mason walked through the gap in the rocks. The air felt different as soon as he stepped through, warmer and somehow alive with energy. He took out his camera to take pictures, but strangely, it wouldn't work. None of his electronic devices seemed to work properly here, except for his energy detector. Mason walked down a narrow path that led into the valley. The place was more beautiful than any natural park he had ever seen. The grass was greener, the flowers brighter. In the center of the valley stood a tall tower made of what looked like glass or crystal. It sparkled in the sunlight, sending rainbow colors across the valley. That must be the source of the energy, Mason thought. He started walking toward the tower, but he didn't get far. 4 people suddenly surrounded him. They wore clothes that looked old-fashioned, like something from hundreds of years ago. They carried sticks that glowed with blue light. These were not normal sticks. They looked like weapons. "Stop right there, outsider," said one of them, a tall man with dark hair. "How did you find our valley?" Mason raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "My name is Dr. Mason Reed. I'm a scientist studying energy patterns. I found your valley because something changed in your, whatever protection you had. It's letting energy leak out now." The guards looked at each other, clearly worried by his words. "Bind his hands," the leader said. "Take him to the council and the new keeper. They will decide what to do with him." They tied Mason's hands with a rope that seemed to be woven with the same glowing crystal as their weapons. Then they led him toward the village at the base of the crystal tower. People came out of their houses to stare at Mason as he was led through the village. Many of them looked scared. Some pointed at him and whispered. Children hid behind their parents. Mason realized that these people probably hadn't seen an outsider in a very long time. Finally, they reached a large building made of stone and wood. Inside, several old men and women sat in a half-circle. They wore robes decorated with crystal patterns. In the center of the half-circle sat a young woman who looked different from the others. She seemed too young to be a leader, but everyone was treating her with great respect. She was pale and looked tired, as if she had just been through something difficult. "Elders of Damsel, Keeper Ilara," said the guard who had captured Mason. "We found this outsider walking toward the crystal spire. He claims to be a scientist from the outside world." One of the old men stood up, looking angry. "How did he find us? The boundary has protected us for centuries." "I tracked the energy coming from your valley," Mason explained. "Something is wrong with whatever force field or energy shield you've been using to hide this place. It's breaking down." The young woman, Ilara, looked at Mason with interest. "You understand energy. You know how it works." Mason nodded. "I'm a doctor of quantum physics. I study how energy behaves at its most basic level." An old woman with white hair and blind eyes raised her hand, and everyone fell silent. "The prophecy," she said in a scratchy voice. "When the spire turns red, a stranger will come from beyond. He will bring both danger and hope." The room grew very quiet. Mason looked around, confused. "I don't know anything about a prophecy. I just followed my readings. But I can tell you this. The energy patterns from your valley are becoming unstable. If something isn't fixed, it could become dangerous." Ilara stood up, holding what looked like a staff made of crystal. "Take him to the guest house. Give him food and water. Postguards outside his door. She looked straight at Mason. Tomorrow, you will show me these energy readings. You will tell me everything you know about what is happening to our valley. As the guards led Mason away, he heard the council break into loud argument. Some wanted to send him away immediately. Others wanted to learn more from him. The next morning, Ilara came to the guest house where Mason was staying. The guards stepped aside to let her in. She looked better today, with more color in her face. "Show me your machines," she said to Mason. "Show me how you found our valley." Mason took out his energy detector and turned it on. It was still working, unlike his other devices. The screen showed waves of energy coming from the crystal spire. "This machine can read energy that most people can't see," Mason explained. "Your valley was hidden by some kind of energy field, but now that field is breaking. Energy is leaking out, and my machine could detect it." Ilara looked at the machine with wonder. "In the outside world, you use machines to see energy. We can feel it directly through our connection to the crystals." "That's what I don't understand," Mason said. "What are these crystals? How do they work? I've never seen anything like them in the scientific world." Ilara thought for a moment, then made a decision. "Come with me. I will show you." The guards didn't like this, but they couldn't argue with the keeper. Ilara led Mason out of the guest house and toward the crystal spire. As they walked, she explained more about Damsel. "Our people came to this valley 1,000 years ago, running from wars in the outside world. They found the crystals growing here naturally. Over time, they learned to speak to the crystals, to work with them. The crystals gave us power, light, and protection." "You talk about the crystals like they're alive," Mason said. "They are alive," Ilara replied simply. "Not like people or animals, but alive in their own way. They grow. They communicate. They can store memories and knowledge." They reached the base of the crystal spire. Up close, it was even more amazing. The crystal seemed to pulse with light from within. Ilara placed her hand on a small panel by the door, and it slid open. Inside, the spire was hollow. A spiral staircase wound up along the inside wall. In the center was a column of pure crystal that glowed with blue-white light. The light was brightest at the top of the spire and flowed down like water. "This is the heart of our valley," Ilara said. "The main crystal connects to all the smaller crystals throughout Damsel. It gives us power for light, heat, and all our needs." Mason was speechless. As a scientist, he knew this should be impossible. Crystals don't produce endless energy, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing. "Can I take some readings?" he asked, holding up his detector. Ilara nodded. As Mason worked with his machine, she watched with curiosity. "Your outside world," she said. "What is it like now? Our oldest books say there were big cities and machines, but also terrible weapons and wars." "There are still wars," Mason admitted, "but also amazing progress. We can talk to people on the other side of the world instantly. We can cure many diseases. We've even sent people to the moon." Ilara's eyes widened. "The moon? People have walked on the moon." Before Mason could answer, his machine made a loud beeping noise. The readings on the screen made him frown. "This is strange," he said. "There's another energy source affecting the crystals. It's coming from outside the valley, but it's sending waves of energy that are disrupting your crystal network. Is that why the protection around our valley is failing?" Ilara asked. "I think so," Mason replied. "Something in the outside world is sending energy waves that match the natural frequency of your crystals. It's like when you hit a musical note that makes a glass vibrate until it breaks." At that moment, the crystal spire began to pulse with red light again. Ilara gasped and grabbed her chest as if in pain. "It's happening again," she whispered. "The crystals are screaming." Mason checked his machine. The readings were off the charts. Whatever is causing this, it just got stronger. Ilara fell to her knees, still holding her chest. "I can feel it. Since I became keeper, I'm connected to the crystal network. When they suffer, I suffer." Mason helped her to her feet. We need to find the source of this interference and stop it. If we don't, your crystals will break down completely. The council must know about this, Ilara said. But many of them don't trust outsiders. They won't want to believe that the danger comes from your world. As they hurried back to the council building, the sky above Damsel flickered strangely. For a brief moment, it looked like a normal sky, not the special protected sky that had covered the valley for centuries. The boundary is failing faster than I thought, Mason said. We don't have much time. Ilara looked at him with worried eyes. If the boundary fails completely, what will happen to Damsel? Mason didn't want to answer. The truth was, he didn't know. But one thing was certain. The peaceful, isolated life of the people of Damsel was coming to an end. Ilara and Mason rushed to the council building. Inside, the elders were already meeting. They looked up in surprise when Ilara burst in with Mason. What is the meaning of this? Elder Torin demanded. He was a tall man with gray hair and a stern face. Why have you brought the outsider here without permission? The situation is worse than we thought, Ilara said, trying to catch her breath. Mason has found the cause of our problems. Elder Syra, the old blind woman, raised her hand for silence. Let them speak. Mason stepped forward with his energy detector. Your crystal network is being affected by an outside source of energy. The waves from this source match the natural pattern of your crystals, causing them to vibrate in a way that breaks down your protective barrier. The elders looked at each other with worried faces. Elder Torin frowned. How can we trust what he says? Torin asked. He is an outsider. For all we know, his people sent him here to spy on us. I came alone, Mason explained. No one else knows about your valley. Most scientists would think this place is impossible. Ilara stood beside Mason. I have seen his readings. I have felt the pain of the crystals myself. We must act quickly. What do you propose we do? Asked Elder Syra. Mason showed them his detector screen. The interference is coming from this direction, beyond the eastern mountains. If I can find the source, maybe I can stop it. You want to leave our valley? Elder Torin's voice rose. So you can bring back others. We have stayed hidden for 1,000 years because we know the outside world would try to take our crystals. The outside world is already affecting you, Mason said firmly, whether you like it or not. If we don't stop this interference, your protection will fail completely. The council room erupted in argument. Some elders thought Mason should be locked away. Others thought they should use crystal weapons to attack the source of the interference. A few believed Mason should be allowed to help. During the shouting, Ilara suddenly gasped and fell to her knees. The crystal staff in her hand turned bright red again. At the same moment, the ground shook violently. Plates and cups fell from shelves and shattered on the floor. When the shaking stopped, Elder Syra spoke in a quiet voice that somehow made everyone listen. The Crystal Codex speaks of this time, she said. It says, when the veil thins and the spire burns red, trust must be given to the one who walks between worlds. She pointed her wrinkled finger at Mason. He is the one who walks between worlds. The crystals have shown us this truth through Ilara's pain. Elder Torin shook his head. The Codex also warns of the destruction that comes from the outside world. We cannot risk our ways. Our ways are already at risk, Ilara said, getting back to her feet. I feel it growing worse by the hour. The crystals are dying. Another elder, a woman named Mira, spoke up. What if some of us go with the outsider? To make sure he does as he promises. This idea caused a new round of discussion. Finally, Elder Syra raised her hand again. We will vote, she said. Should we allow the outsider to leave and try to stop the interference? Or should we keep him here and try to strengthen our own defenses? The vote was close, but in the end, the council decided that Mason should be allowed to go, but he would not go alone. Ilara would go with him, along with 2 guards. The keeper cannot leave the valley, Elder Torin protested. It has never been done. These are new times, Elder Syra replied. The keeper feels the pain of the crystals. She will know if the interference stops. And the outsider needs someone who understands our ways. Mason wasn't sure if this was good news or bad news. He would be allowed to leave, but now he had the responsibility of protecting Ilara and finding the source of the interference. Ilara looked at him with determined eyes. I have never left the valley, she said, but I will do what I must to save our people. They were given 1 day to prepare for the journey. Mason was taken back to the guest house, this time with fewer guards. Ilara went to the crystal spire to prepare herself and consult with the crystal network. That night, Mason sat by the window, looking at the strange, beautiful valley that had been hidden from the world for so long. Tomorrow, he would take the keeper of the crystal spire into the modern world. How would she react to cars, phones, computers, and all the noise and confusion? And somewhere out there was a source of energy powerful enough to break through ancient protections and disturb the crystal network. Mason had a bad feeling about what they might find. Outside his window, the night sky flickered again, showing stars that should not be visible in Damsel. The boundary was failing faster now. Time was running out for the hidden valley and its crystal guardians. The next morning, a small group gathered at the edge of Damsel Valley. Ilara wore simple clothes instead of her keeper's robe, but she still carried her crystal staff. The 2 guards, Nev and Talia, looked nervous. Mason checked his backpack. He had his energy detector and some food. The Damsel people had given him clean clothes that looked less strange than their own traditional outfits. Once we pass through the boundary, we'll need to be careful, Mason explained. The outside world is very different from Damsel. Ilara nodded. She had spent the night learning all she could from the crystal spire. The crystals have shown me images of your world. It seems noisy. That's a good word for it, Mason agreed. Elder Syra approached Ilara and placed a small crystal necklace around her neck. This will help you stay connected to our network, even beyond the boundary, she said. Remember, you must return within 7 days, or your connection to the main crystal will weaken. Ilara touched the necklace. I understand. Elder Torrens still looked unhappy, but he gave each of the travelers a small bag of crystal dust. If you face danger, throw this on the ground. It will create a light that blinds enemies. As they prepared to leave, the whole village gathered to watch. Many people looked scared. Some were crying. No one had left the valley in living memory. We will return, Ilara promised them, and we will save the boundary. The 4 travelers walked toward the eastern edge of the valley, where the boundary was thinnest. As they got closer, they could see it flickering like a bad television picture. Sometimes they could see the real mountain beyond, sometimes the false image created by the protection. We need to time this carefully, Mason said. When the boundary flickers, we should be able to walk through. They watched the flickering pattern for a few minutes. Then Mason counted. 1, 2, 3 now. They stepped through the boundary just as it flickered. There was a strange pulling sensation, like walking through thick syrup, and then they were on the other side. The air felt different immediately, colder and thinner. The colors around them seemed less bright. Ilara and the guards looked back, but they could only see a solid mountain wall. The boundary still works one way, Mason said. People outside can't see in, but we can't see in either now. Ilara touched her crystal necklace. I can still feel the connection, but it's weaker. They began walking down the mountain path. Mason led the way, checking his energy detector often. The source of the interference was somewhere to the east, maybe a day's journey away. After an hour of walking, they reached the place where Mason had parked his car. The Damsel people gasped when they saw it. What is this metal box? Nev asked, touching the car carefully. It's called a car, Mason explained. It's how we travel long distances in the outside world. It's like a wagon that moves without horses. The 3 Damsel people looked doubtful, but they agreed to get inside after Mason showed them how the doors worked. Ilara sat in the front, while Nev and Talia squeezed into the back seat. When Mason started the engine, Talia nearly jumped out of the car in fear. The noise and vibration terrified them. Ilara gripped her staff tightly but stayed calm. "Trust him," she told the others. "Remember why we're here." As they drove down the mountain road, the Damsel people stared wide-eyed at everything they passed. Even simple things like power lines and road signs amazed them. "Your world is so crowded," Ilara said, looking at all the human-made objects. "You have changed so much of the natural land." Mason felt a little embarrassed. Seeing his world through their eyes made him notice things he usually ignored. The litter along the road, the ugly cell towers, the scars of mining on distant hills. After driving for several hours, they reached a small town. Mason needed to get fuel for his car and check his computer for more information. But first, he had to prepare his companions. "Listen carefully," he said. "People here will think your clothes and speech are strange. Try not to touch anything you don't understand. Stay close to me. And most importantly, don't talk about Damsel or the crystals." They parked at a gas station on the edge of town. As Mason filled the car with gas, Ilara stood nearby, watching everything with curious eyes. Suddenly, she stiffened and grabbed her chest. "It's happening again," she whispered. "The crystals are in pain." At the same moment, Mason's energy detector began beeping loudly. The readings were stronger than ever. "We're getting closer to the source," he said. He pointed to a large building on a hill beyond the town. It was surrounded by tall fences. "I think it's coming from there." The building had a sign, Quantum Dynamics Corporation, pioneering tomorrow's energy. "Stay here," Mason told Ilara and the guards. "Let me talk to her alone." Mason walked over to Dr. Amara Chen as she was putting gas in her car. He tried to look friendly and normal. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you from Quantum Dynamics?" "I'm Dr. Mason Reed, quantum physicist from Eastern State University." Dr. Chen looked surprised and a little suspicious. "Yes, I work there." "What kind of energy patterns?" Mason showed her his energy detector with its unusual readings. "I've never seen anything like this before. It's affecting some sensitive equipment I've been working with in the mountains." Dr. Chen studied the readings with growing interest. "This is strange. Our quantum resonator is still in the testing phase. It shouldn't be producing effects this strong or this far away." Quantum resonator. Mason tried to keep his voice calm even though his heart was racing. "That's exactly the kind of technology that could cause these patterns." Dr. Chen looked at him more carefully. "You know, we've been getting some weird feedback in our tests too. Energy bouncing back that we can't explain." She made a decision. "Look, why don't you come to the lab? Our director might want to talk to you about this." This was exactly what Mason had hoped for, but now he had a problem. He couldn't leave Ilara and the others, but he couldn't explain who they were either. "Actually, I have my research team with me," he said, pointing to where Ilara and the guards were standing awkwardly by his car. "We've all been tracking these energy patterns." Dr. Chen looked doubtful. "They don't look like scientists." "They're graduate students helping with my field research. Very bright. Just a bit unusual." Dr. Chen shrugged. "Fine, they can come too. Follow me in your car. I'll call ahead so security knows to expect you." As Dr. Chen drove away, Mason hurried back to the others. "Listen carefully," he said. "We're going to follow her to the building. She thinks you're my students. Don't talk much. Let me do the talking. If anyone asks, you're helping me study energy patterns in the mountains." "What is a student?" Nev asked. "Someone who learns from a teacher," Mason explained quickly. "Just stay quiet and watch what I do." They got back in the car and followed Dr. Chen's black car up the winding road to Quantum Dynamics. The building looked even bigger up close, all glass and steel, very different from the stone and wood buildings of Damsel. At the gate, a security guard checked their IDs. Mason showed his university card, but the others had nothing. They forgot their IDs back at the university, Mason explained. But Dr. Chen is expecting all of us. The guard made a call, then waved them through. They parked and followed Dr. Chen into the building. Inside, Ilara and the guards tried not to stare at everything. The bright lights, the smooth floors, the strange machines. It was all so different from their home. "Are you feeling okay?" Mason whispered to Ilara, who looked pale. "The pain is stronger here," she whispered back, touching her crystal necklace. "The crystals are screaming." They rode in an elevator to the 5th floor. Ilara gripped her staff tightly as the elevator moved up, clearly frightened by the sensation. Dr. Chen led them into a large room filled with computers and strange equipment. In the center was a round platform with a glowing device that pulsed with energy. "This is our quantum resonator," Dr. Chen explained. "It's designed to draw energy from quantum fluctuations in space-time. Basically, free energy from the fabric of reality itself." Mason looked at the machine with growing concern. "That's ambitious and potentially dangerous if it's not properly tuned." "That's why we're still in the testing phase," Dr. Chen said. "We're getting more power than we expected, but also some strange feedback. Like something is responding to our signals." Ilara was staring at the resonator with wide eyes. The pulses of energy matched exactly the rhythm of her pain. Each time it pulsed, she felt the crystals cry out. "This is it," she whispered to Mason. "This machine is hurting the crystal network." A door opened, and a tall man in an expensive suit walked in. He had cold eyes and a fake smile. "Dr. Chen, who are these people?" he demanded. "This is Dr. Reed from Eastern State University, Mr. Voss," Dr. Chen explained. "He's been tracking energy patterns from our resonator miles away in the mountains." Richard Voss, the CEO of Quantum Dynamics, looked at Mason with sudden interest. "Is that so? What kind of patterns?" Before Mason could answer, Ilara stepped forward. She couldn't stand the pain any longer. "Your machine is destroying my world," she said clearly. "It must be stopped." Ilara's crystal staff glowed brighter and brighter. The security guards stopped moving, unsure what to do. No one in the room had ever seen anything like this before. "Stay back," Mason warned everyone. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." Richard Voss stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the glowing staff. "What kind of technology is that?" "Some kind of new energy source." "It's not technology as you understand it," Mason said. "Please, just shut down the resonator before things get worse." Dr. Chen looked from Ilara to the quantum resonator. She could see that every time the machine pulsed, the light in Ilara's staff changed too. "There's a connection," she said softly. "They're affecting each other." "Enough of this," Voss snapped. "Security, take them and that device they have." As the guards moved forward again, Ilara did something desperate. She pointed her staff at the quantum resonator and sent a pulse of crystal energy into it. The two energy fields met in a flash of blinding light. The room shook. Computer screens cracked. The lights went out, then came back on, flickering wildly. "What have you done?" Voss shouted, grabbing a desk to keep from falling. Ilara fell to her knees, weakened by the effort. Nev and Talia rushed to her side, pulling out their crystal weapons to protect her. "The resonator is overloading," Dr. Chen yelled, looking at her monitors. "Power levels are off the charts." Mason helped Ilara to her feet. "We need to get out of here now," he said. "That machine is going to blow." But it was too late for a simple escape. The quantum resonator was spinning faster than ever, creating a swirling vortex of energy in the center of the room. Papers and small objects began flying around, pulled toward the vortex. "Shut it down," Voss ordered, his face pale with fear. "I can't." Dr. Chen's fingers flew over her keyboard. "The controls aren't responding." The vortex grew larger, crackling with blue and white lightning. In the center, something strange appeared. A window-like opening that showed glimpses of another place. It was Damsel Valley, visible through the thinning boundary. The worlds are connecting, Ilara gasped. The resonator is tearing a hole between your world and mine. Security guards and scientists ran from the room in panic. Only Voss, Dr. Chen, and our 4 travelers remained, watching in horror and wonder as the vortex grew. We have to close it, Mason said. If the boundary between worlds is completely broken, who knows what might happen? Ilara looked at her staff, which was pulsing weakly now. I don't have enough power left to stop it, she said. The staff is draining as the connection to the crystal spire weakens. Suddenly, Dr. Chen stepped forward. I think I understand what's happening, she said. Your crystal energy and our quantum resonator are similar but opposite forces. They're like matter and antimatter. When they meet, they create enormous power. Then how do we stop it? Nev demanded. We need to balance the energies, Dr. Chen said. She pointed to a control panel. If I can adjust the resonator's frequency to match your crystal energy exactly, they might cancel each other out instead of fighting. That could work, Mason said, but we'd need a stable source of crystal energy to match it to. Everyone looked at Ilara's necklace, the small crystal given to her by Elder Syra. This is my connection to the crystal spire, Ilara said, touching it. If we use it, I may never be able to return home. If we don't stop this, there may not be a home to return to, Talia said gently. Tears in her eyes, Ilara removed her necklace. Tell me what to do, she said to Dr. Chen. Place it here, in the resonator's energy intake, Dr. Chen instructed, pointing to a small opening in the machine. As Ilara moved toward the swirling vortex, Voss suddenly pushed her aside. Wait. That crystal is obviously valuable technology. Quantum dynamics should study it first. He grabbed for the necklace, but Nev was faster. The guard tackled Voss to the ground. This is not about money, he shouted. While they struggled, Ilara stepped up to the resonator. The pull of the vortex was strong now, tugging at her clothes and hair. With a deep breath, she pushed her crystal necklace into the opening. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crystal began to glow with intense light. The resonator's wild spinning slowed. The vortex began to shrink. It's working, Dr. Chen called out, checking her instruments. The energies are balancing. The light grew so bright that everyone had to cover their eyes. There was a sound like thunder, then complete silence. When they could see again, the resonator was still. The vortex was gone. But so was Ilara. Ilara, Mason called, looking around frantically. Where is she? A faint voice answered, coming from the now dark crystal in the resonator. I'm here, and not here. 3 days after the incident at Quantum Dynamics, Mason, Nev, and Talia stood at the edge of where the boundary to Damsel used to be. The mountain path now led straight into the valley without any magical barrier. They carried Ilara's crystal, which glowed softly in the morning light. The valley is completely open now, Nev said, looking worried. Anyone can walk in. Not exactly, Mason replied. Thanks to Dr. Chen, we've set up equipment that makes the path hard to find unless you know it's there. It's not perfect, but it will help. They walked down the path into Damsel Valley. The crystal spire in the center still stood tall, but its light pulsed in a new rhythm now, matching the small crystal they carried. The people of Damsel stared at them as they walked through the village. Everyone could feel that something had changed. The air itself felt different, as if the valley was now part of the larger world, even though it still looked the same. The Council of Elders was waiting in their meeting hall. Elder Syra sat in the center, her blind eyes somehow seeing more than those who could see normally. You have returned, she said, but the keeper has not. At least, not in the way she left. Mason placed Ilara's crystal on the table in front of the elders. It glowed brighter in response to their presence. I am here, Ilara's voice came from the crystal. I have changed, but I am still your keeper. Elder Torin leaned forward, his face showing both wonder and fear. "What happened to you, child?" Through the crystal, Ilara told the story of what had happened at quantum dynamics. She explained how the two energy fields had fought each other until she used her crystal necklace to create balance. "In doing so, I became something new," she explained. "My body is gone, but my mind and spirit live in the crystal network now. I can see both worlds. I can be in Damsel and the outside world at the same time." "What does this mean for our valley?" asked Elder Mira. "Our protection is gone." "The old protection is gone," Ilara agreed. "But I can create a new kind of protection. Not a hard boundary that cuts us off completely, but a softer one that allows us to connect with the outside world in safe ways." The elders looked at each other, uncertain. For 1,000 years, they had lived apart from the world. The idea of connecting with it now was frightening. "The world outside has much to offer," Mason said. "Medicine that could have saved Ilara's mother and sisters. Knowledge that could help you understand your crystals better. And your crystal knowledge could help solve energy problems in our world." "But the outside world is also dangerous," Talia pointed out. "Greedy men like Voss would try to take our crystals if they could. That's why we need a careful bridge between worlds," Mason said. "Limited contact, controlled by people who understand both sides." The crystal spire suddenly pulsed with bright light. In the center of the council room, a figure appeared, Ilara, looking just as she had before, but slightly transparent, like a ghost. "This is how I can appear to you now," her image said, while her voice still came from the crystal too. "I am learning to use the crystal network in new ways." The council members gasped. Some reached out to touch her image, but their hands passed through it. "I see a path forward," Ilara continued. "A small group from Damsel will learn about the outside world. A small group from outside, people we can trust, will learn about Damsel. Together, they will build a bridge of understanding." "And who will lead this bridge?" Elder Syra asked. "Mason will lead from the outside world," Ilara said. "And from Damsel." She looked at Nev and Talia. "These two have seen both worlds now. They understand the dangers and opportunities." Nev looked surprised. "Us, but we're just guards." "You are more than that now," Ilara said. "You are the first Damsel people in 1,000 years to walk in the outside world and return. Your experiences make you perfect for this role." Elder Syra nodded slowly. The Crystal Codex spoke of this time. It said, "When the Keeper becomes one with the crystal heart, a new age will begin. The children of Damsel will walk two worlds, carrying crystal light to a world of darkness." "I don't want our world to change," Elder Torrens said sadly. "It already has," Elder Syra replied. "We can guide the change or be swept away by it. The choice is ours." After much discussion, the council agreed to Ilara's plan. Mason would return to the outside world with Dr. Chen. Together, they would create a small research team to study the crystal energy safely without exploiting it. 1 year had passed since the day Ilara became one with the crystal network. In Damsel Valley, a small school now stood near the village center. Here, young people learned about the outside world, its history, science, and languages. Mason visited often to teach, bringing books and simple technology that could work without harming the crystal network. At the edge of the valley, Dr. Chen had set up a small research lab. She worked with 3 Damsel crystal experts to study how the living crystals grew and communicated. They were careful to never harm the crystals or take more than the network could easily regrow. The crystal spire still stood tall, but it looked different now. Small branches of crystal had grown out from its sides, reaching toward the sky like a tree. People said this showed Ilara's influence, her love of nature affecting the way the crystal network grew. Mason stood at his desk in the school, watching his students leave for the day. Talia, now the head teacher, walked over to him. "They're learning so fast," she said with a smile. "Yesterday little Kara asked me how computers work. I barely know myself." Mason laughed. "Bring her to the lab tomorrow. I'll show her the basics." As they cleaned up the classroom, the crystal pendant Mason wore began to glow softly. This was how Ilara let him know she wanted to talk. "I need to go to the spire," he told Talia. "Ilara is calling." Mason walked through the village toward the crystal spire. Many things looked the same: the stone houses, the garden plots, the people in their simple clothes. But there were small changes too. Some houses now had solar panels that worked with crystal energy. The healer's house had a small medical clinic with modern equipment. Change was happening, but slowly and carefully. At the base of the crystal spire, Mason placed his hand on the smooth surface. Immediately, Ilara's image appeared before him, looking just as she had a year ago, though her eyes seemed older and wiser. "Hello, Mason," she said. "Thank you for coming." "I always will," he replied. "What's happening? You seem excited." "I found something," Ilara said. "Or rather, someone." Her image waved a hand, and another figure appeared beside her. A young man with dark skin and eyes that glowed slightly with crystal light. "This is Thilo," Ilara explained. "He lives in a hidden valley on another continent. His people also found living crystals, though they use them differently than Damsel does." Mason stared in amazement. "Another hidden community. How did you find them?" "Through the crystal network," Ilara said. "As I told you, there are crystal deposits all over the world. Most are dormant, but some have awakened. Thilo's people awakened theirs centuries ago." Thilo's image bowed to Mason. "Our valley is called Lumina," he said. "We thought we were alone until Ilara's consciousness touched our crystal network." "There are others too," Ilara said, her voice excited. "Small groups in hidden places, all connected by the crystal network without knowing it. Until now." Mason sat down on a nearby bench, trying to take in this news. So Damsel isn't unique. There are other hidden communities with crystal technology. 7 that I've found so far, Ilara said. Each developed different ways of working with the crystals. Thilo's people use them for healing. Another group in mountains far to the north uses them to control weather in their valley. "This changes everything," Mason said. "If all these communities could share their knowledge." "Exactly," Ilara said. "That's why I called you. The elders need to know about this. We need to organize a meeting of representatives from all these places." Mason nodded. "I'll help however I can. But how will these other people travel here? Some might be on the other side of the world." Ilara and Thilo looked at each other and smiled. "We've been working on that," Thilo said. "The crystal network connects all our valleys. With the right focus, we believe we can use it to move people." "You mean teleportation?" Mason asked in disbelief. "Is that even possible?" "We don't have a name for it yet," Ilara said. "But yes, in theory. The crystals can store the pattern of a person and recreate it elsewhere. Thilo's people have already moved small objects between crystals." Mason thought about how this knowledge could change the world, for better or worse. "This needs to stay secret from the outside world, at least for now," he said. "If governments or corporations learned about this." "We agree," said Thilo. "That's why we're only connecting the hidden valleys at first. People who already understand and respect the crystals." The 3 of them talked late into the evening, planning the first meeting of the 7 hidden communities. They would share their knowledge, their different ways of working with the crystals, and perhaps find new solutions to problems they all faced.